Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Yaffe. I'm a senior editor at the Free Press, and I am joined today by Glenna Goldis. Glenna, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
So, until last week, Glenna, you were an assistant attorney general for the state of New York in the Bureau of Consumer Fraud and Protection. Then last week, you were fired by your boss, New York Attorney General Letitia James. This was for your opposition to what's called gender-affirming care, especially for young people. This week, you have a piece in the Free Press uh, about your experiences and what happened to you. And everyone can read it now at thefp.com. I recommend you do. So, Glenna, what happened?
Well, I was a consumer fraud attorney in the AG's office, and so my job had to do with protecting New Yorkers, especially low-income New Yorkers, from companies trying to exploit them. So that included looking at debt collectors and predatory lenders, some work related to nursing homes, that sort of thing. It did not have to do with, what you call gender-affirming care or transitioning children. But in my free time, I started looking into that issue, and I realized it was really fraught. And in fact, I saw some patterns in that industry that matched up with what I've been seeing, what I associated with scams that I've been working on for years in my career.
What led you to this, and what made you start to think that gender affirming care could come under the umbrella of fraud?
Well, I was following it like a lot of people were, like a lot of my friends were. I may have been more interested in it because it's tagged as LGBTQ and I'm a lesbian. So it felt like an issue that I was supposed to be up to date on. So I followed it for that reason. And then I just kept finding more and more. I was curious, so I was digging. And at first I saw it as a cosmetic issue, but because that's how it's kind of sold in the left media. It's like choosing between having a beard and having breasts, for example. But then I heard a podcast with a woman, a lesbian who had detransitioned, and she was talking about how it really hurt her body to be on that testosterone. So yeah, she was talking about all these physical side effects as well as mood and emotional, because that's, it's a psychoactive drug. And I was just stunned by that because I thought, oh, this is not just a cosmetic treatment. This is something that hurts people. This is really high stakes. And the woman I listened to was in her 30s when she transitioned. I got to know her later. But, they're talking about doing this to kids, so they can't possibly understand what's going on. And so then that made me, it ratcheted up the importance in my mind. So I started researching it more.
And then what happened?
Well, I started writing first under a pseudonym. So I had some friends who already opened up Substacks related to pediatric gender medicine. So I started writing for them. And again, this is in my free time. And so I built up, I was meeting more people in that world. At the same time, at work, I was thinking, it was part of my job to identify scams out in the world and then tell my bosses about them and propose action. So I thought about the best way to do that. Like, I'm not a fool. I knew I was in a Democratic run agency and that it was generally, pro transition or whatever. But I saw a good opportunity and an important opportunity in the fall of 2024. So that was when Idaho led a coalition of states to send a letter demanding documents from the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is one of the big boosters of pediatric gender medicine. And so this is basically the launch of an investigation by attorney general's offices. And we often, at the New York office, collaborated with other states. So I proposed that we join that, and kind of fell on deaf ears, I would say, And so I took my shot, and then I thought, okay, well, I've laid some groundwork.
Did you know at the time you were putting yourself in radical opposition to your colleagues?
Well, when you say colleagues, it's a huge agency. So I would say I knew I was at odds with the official position of the agency. I'm kind of an optimist. Yeah. I thought they were really uninformed, honestly, because I knew I'm kind of an obsessive person. So I figured at that point, I've read more about this than a lot of my colleagues have. And so it's fine that they disagree with me, but if I'm able to present information, I'm sure I couldn't persuade everybody in the agency there, but I was thinking, let's lay some groundwork, because I think over time this issue is going to become more obvious to other people besides just me. So,
it's interesting in that this should be really a strictly medical issue, right? is a treatment for a distressed young person appropriate, effective, safe? But like so many things in our society, this issue has now become almost totally politicized.
Yes.
When Donald Trump returned to office in January of last year, one of the first acts he took was to take on gender transition of young people and put down a marker and say his administration was vehemently opposed to this. So your boss, your ultimate boss, Letitia James, and Donald Trump couldn't be more fierce opponents. So what was it like for you to feel so passionately that something was being done that was harming young people, and yet that was going to align you with Donald Trump?
Well, I was perfectly happy to be aligned with Donald Trump. I mean, I was happy to see the orders that he issued, and I'm not the kind of person who says, "Oh, they're all, like," I'm historically I was more of a Democratic voter, but that was historical, and I just don't care. I'm really not into partisan politics, so I'm aware that my peers were super sensitive to that issue, and I was happy. I was happy with the work he did back from day one and continuing to today.
That's pretty amazing, because that you describe yourself in the piece in the Free Press as a progressive lesbian.
I had a progressive career.
That's a big jump. That's a big step for someone to step that far away from your own tribe.
Yeah, I'm not a tribal kind of person.
Were you scared?
Uh, no, I mean, no. Honestly, I'd already been chatting with a lot of friends in my personal life and family over the previous few years, like, hey, this is a subject I'm looking into. And there were a few negative reactions, but for the most part, like, people were like, okay, I'll listen to you. I was kind of curious about that topic too. And, like, no, I'm not going to be scared of having an idea or having an alliance with somebody from the other side, which is not even like another side because I'm not on a side.
At the height of what was kind of a transgender frenzy, there were all sorts of, we should be introducing these ideas to children at the youngest ages, kindergarten, elementary school kids, telling them about the genderbread person, that they can be any gender they want. This was the beginning of biological males entering female sports, and even biological males saying they're women and want to be housed in women's prisons. There's a feeling now that maybe that's past. You are not the only person to lose a job for taking this stance, but has it passed? Are you concerned that we really haven't dealt with this as an issue?
Yeah, I'm still very concerned. I don't think it's passed. I think some of the Democrats and some people on the left have gotten smarter about how they talk about it or avoiding the subject. But when you look at the policies that they're pursuing, it's the same. And when you look at the nonprofits who are fighting this, like, for example, the ACLU and Lambda Legal, they are very well funded. They still seem to be raising money. They're still out there filing the same lawsuits and arguing the same extreme ideas. I think they kind of acknowledge that they're going to have to pare back a little bit when it comes to sports. But there's, we're basically still having to fight. And, I'm worried that if the Democrats came back into power at the federal level, then they would do what Letitia James is trying to do at the state level.
And tell us what that is.
Well, right now, she's mostly fighting Trump. So she has some lawsuits. Oh, well, one really extreme thing she did was that she issued guidance to the school boards all across New York State. So she has some kind of control over them. I think she's able to remove them from power, for example, individuals. And so she issued this guidance that said that they had to control how they spoke about transgender issues, and they had to control how members of the public spoke at school board meetings. So they had to use preferred pronouns. They have to pretend somebody is, like, even a child is the sex that they say they are. And they're not able to freely debate issues such as boys playing girls' sports. And this is completely outrageous under the First Amendment. And I found out about this because she was sued a month ago by some parents and school board members in Nassau County on Long Island. So that is an extreme anti-free speech position, perfect example of how censorious the Democrats are, and Tish James in particular. And that's so, and she's trying to do that right now. I think it came out kind of quietly last year. So I'm very afraid of what the Democrats are trying to do at the state level.
So let's get back to you and what happened to you. So you raised some consumer fraud issues. You looked into the science. You said this is not benign treatment. You had a Substack. You started writing in that. But what was happening in the office and in your life?
So in my life, like I said, a lot of people I know knew that I was working on it. And one of the things that propelled me forward was that I was getting a lot of either positive reactions or people saying, "This seems important. Thank you for looking into it." Like, a lot of my friends have young children, so they're too busy to be writing Substacks about this, but they're like, "Okay, I saw this at my kid's pediatrician's office and I thought it was weird." So I was kind of propelled forward by that. I wasn't getting, there was some pushback, but not from anybody who matters. And this is, my friend group, I've been a public interest lawyer for 15 years now. And some of my childhood friends actually grew up to be like kind of lefty public interest lawyers. So I know the left really well. And I know that, they're with me. Even some of them are a little too afraid to say that. Some of them are pretending they're not right now. But so in my private life, I was like, okay, it's stressful because I know I can never get another job on the left as long as I'm open about this, which once I put my name on my blog and my advocacy in October of 2024. And that was a turning point because I said, okay, if someone Googles me, they'll find out I have the wrong opinions. And so then even if they agree with me, they can't give me a job on the left, which is where my whole career has been up until now. So that was stressful, but my personal life by that point also consisted of a lot of friendships with people who had been harmed by gender medicine. So detransitioners and parents of kids who, embarked on this path, others who lost their job, whistleblowers. So in my life, I was feeling like, I'm sad that I'm in a risky position and that my career might go in a different direction than I'd hoped, but I felt like I was on the right path to be speaking out.
So what was happening at work and what led to last week?
Sure. So, things are pretty quiet at work. Again, most people knew what I was up to. And it's a big agency, so the people I worked with were not the same ones who were filing these trans lawsuits down the hallway. And it was fine. But things came to a head really April of last year. So that was when a colleague of mine at a meeting had referred to girls who oppose boys in their sports as anti-trans. And I did not like that. It was unfair. So after the meeting, I went to his office. And this was somebody I was friendly with. And we would debate or whatever. We'd even talked about this particular issue before. So I said, I gave him some statistics about boys who had been winning girls' trophies in high school sports recently. And he was emotional. And he, said he didn't want to talk about this topic with me. And, it was very strange. And then there was something where he said, "I'm going to call HR if you're nice." And I was like, okay, sure. Unclear exactly why, but clearly related to the fact that we'd had this discussion. And I don't know what happened, except that a couple of weeks later, I got an email from HR saying, or not from HR, from the general counsel's office saying that it's come to our attention that you have a blog and you need to report this to us because we have policies about what our employees may say outside of the office. So I had known about this policy, and it has struck, I'm not a constitutional scholar, it's not my area of law, but it has struck me as presenting free speech violations because government employees have rights under the First Amendment to speak out. They're not absolute, but there seem to be violations in this policy. So I said, I don't think I do have to file this thing. I don't want to, but ultimately they said, you know what? Yeah, I'll do this. I'll file your request because, honestly, it was an opportunity for me to make the argument for what I was doing because I explained my advocacy in a little paragraph, and I liked it. That was going up the chain and people would see it because I was always trying to think of a kind of appropriate ways to raise the issue in the office. I didn't want to do it inappropriately or disruptively, but this was the path they gave me. So this would go up through a chain of hierarchy. So I said, great, I'll fill out the request. And I did that. And then they did not rule on it for a while. So it was just sitting there, and I just kept blogging. That started in April. In June, I received an invitation to speak at the Federal Trade Commission, which I was very excited about. They were holding an event about pediatric gender medicine to explore whether or not it might be a fraud. That's what they do at the FTC. So I wanted to speak at that. It seemed to fall under that policy. And so I said, okay, I'll put in a request. And that request was denied. And so I wanted to appeal that. And I found out there was no appeal process. So I just, I had a meeting with my supervisors who, to their credit, like it's not their job to administer, to protect employee free speech rights, like they're consumer fraud experts. But I was saying I'd like to speak to somebody who does know First Amendment, so we can get to the bottom of this, because I don't know what the reasoning is, but I think I'm in the right. And that, they said, like, we don't know who does that. That's never happened before. So ultimately, I wasn't able to find like a rationale for the policy that would forbid me from going there. And by the way, it's not like I'm somebody who's always asking for rationales behind rules. It's, I've got most of my career not doing that. But it was very important on this particular topic to be speaking out. I did not want to be censored for no good reason. I wanted to understand the legal reasoning behind it if we were going to have some kind of confrontation about it. So I went to speak at the FTC. I went to that event in July. It was great.
And just summarize quickly what you expressed there.
So a couple of points. It was like, is this a consumer fraud? And what I pointed out was all day we had been hearing about the types of fraud, like not sharing the side effects with the patient, like that's really bad, and misleading the parents of patients about what the condition was that they even suffered from and what might happen if they didn't use the drug. So they were told, the parents were told, essentially that their kids would kill themselves, which is not true or based on anything. And so I said, that's all true. That is really problematic. But what I focused on is the word gender and how the word gender is used in a deceptive way by doctors based on what we have heard. So the fact that gender is a familiar word to everybody makes you kind of gloss over it. But it actually has multiple definitions in English. For example, it could be a synonym for sex. It could mean sex stereotypes. It can mean actual natural differences between the sexes. Gender is used in all those different ways and more. And gender doctors just throw it around without defining it. And they literally, like, 'cause I've examined the court papers, so I know what their expert witnesses say. They literally just give a circular definition where it's like, your gender, like you're a male, you have a male gender identity, that means you're a man. A man is somebody who has a male gender identity, but they won't tether it to any physical characteristics. So I said, like, the word gender is just being used as this kind of placeholder that glides you from, I have a gender problem, to I need gender medicine. But the word itself doesn't mean anything. It's just, you can just take it out and say, I have a problem, therefore I need medicine. So I was saying something related to that, and I gave a bunch of the interesting definitions or non-definitions that gender doctors themselves had put out in the public realm.
You go talk to the FTC, you come back to work, and things start escalating.
Yeah, so even before I go there, they're like, they know I'm going to head down there because there was an article in the Daily Wire, and I had told my bosses a day or two before, like, I've decided to go. So they sent me an email before I spoke that said, you're going to be disciplined, report to this disciplinary meeting. So that was scheduled. There were some false starts. Eventually we have the meeting, and this is me and the general counsel and the deputy general counsel. And I want to highlight that a lot of the staff involved in this are great people. Like, my problem is with Letitia James. So even in this meeting, I dealt with several people from general counsel's office, and they're fine, they're professional. But the general counsel herself was, not wanting to have a substantive conversation about this, and not amused by the fact that I think the First Amendment applied to the situation. So the conversation just, part of it is just asking me all about my activities, and for the sake of finding out if I'm in compliance with the policy, okay. And if I have conflicts of interest, okay, fine. But then, when it comes to the policy, she keeps asking me, like, but didn't you violate it? And I was like, well, I think the policy is unconstitutional. And she'd say, but you violated it. And I'd be like, but it shouldn't exist.
This is the policy that you can't speak out about this subject because you're office deals with it.
Yeah, so to be more precise, it's a policy that says you need to seek permission 21 days in advance of saying anything, which is generally, yeah. And also that you can't say things that are inconsistent with the agency's position on a variety, and it kind of says related to the agency's work, but because it's such a generalist firm, it's the New York Attorney General's office, it ropes in, pretty much all domestic issues. So after that, they send me some memos and letters kind of reiterating that I can't say anything that's inconsistent with the agency's position. And then it's kind of quiet for a while, like from September until a couple of weeks ago in January. And so then suddenly in January, I get an email one day saying, we heard that you're going to be speaking on an X Space tonight related to BPJ, which is a lawsuit that was before the Supreme Court about girls' sports and whether boys can play in them. So I was planning to speak on an X Space hosted by Democrats for an Informed Approach to Gender, DIAG. And they'd seen my office had seen a promo for that somewhere. And they said, you don't have permission to speak at that. And I went ahead and spoke. And so then, and that gave me an idea. So that email had come from the ethics chief, who I've never met in person, but he's Tish James's ethics chief. So I thought, that's a good opportunity for me to surface this issue for him, because I'm thinking, ethics chief, he has jurisdiction over this question of like whether the agency is saying things that are false. So, which at that point I do believe, the agency had filed some lawsuits against Trump, where they said that gender-affirming care, that's their language, is life-saving, medically necessary, evidence-based, and safe, and it's none of those things. At least we have strong reason for believing it's none of those things. So I wrote up a memo explaining why those were all problematic statements, why it's not medically necessary, and all of that. And I sent that to the ethics chief. And I also highlighted how this could possibly be an ethical issue. So then, no response to that. And a couple of days later, I got a letter that said, you've been violating our policies on outside activities, and listed some examples. And it said that I was unethical because of that, and that somehow I had violated state law, which is fascinating. And it said you have 1 week to decide whether to resign, or you can agree to abide by the terms of the outside activity policy, which I believe was unconstitutional, and which would mean that I wouldn't speak out anymore. And if I didn't do one of those things, then I would be fired. So I thought about it, and I couldn't. One idea was to just to kind of buy time by saying, okay, I agree to the terms, but that wouldn't have been very genuine, because I did plan to keep speaking out. And so I let the deadline pass, and they fired me.
It couldn't have been a surprise, but how does it feel?
Well, it has been a stressful time, as you can imagine. I have been thinking for a while of what I might do next, and I've been, networking just in the course of when I was speaking out publicly, but not working on it. I was meeting people in the field. So I'm hopeful that I can, put together an income, or hopefully work full-time on the issue of gender. Nothing's final now, but I am optimistic.
The Free Press has, over the past few years, run many stories on this subject, path-breaking stories about how damaging transition on demand has been, and how poor the evidence is for it. And in those years, many European countries have effectively banned it for children. But here you are in a world where you've been fired for talking about this, and where the people you work with seem not to know that other liberal European countries have banned it, etc. That that there have been examinations like the one you've done on the evidence that doesn't support it. What's going on there? Now we have lawsuits from young people who are seeking damages for being harmed, and yet the last readout of transition on demand seems to be Democratic officials.
Yeah, that's right. Europe and the American Republicans have, in very different style, discovered the problems with this. And yeah, you have these blue states. And I mean, this is the $1 million question. Those of us who have who are kind of culturally came up in the left area, and now we're all over the place, but we just obsess over this constantly. Why are the leaders in our states and in our old institutions just blinding themselves to the reality out there? And it's not good to speculate, and we've gone crazy trying to figure that out. But it's one way or another, it's corrupt because they don't have an excuse. They have people like me raising the alarm. They have, the Trump administration has done a fantastic job getting this word out. For example, they published, the Department of Health and Human Services published a report on this subject. The final version is out now. It went through peer review. They responded to every critique. It was totally public. It is, full of footnotes. Like, you can check their work yourself. It's not mysterious. They had great experts working on it who are not politically, they're just not political figures. So that's out there, and everybody who cares about this subject one iota should be reading it. And there is no excuse not to read that report. If you are somebody, for example, who works in the law office that's filing lawsuits, perhaps suing the president, then you should be reading that report, and you should have a damn good reason why you're not following the suggestions there that this is unethical. So I can't say why the Democrats are staying on this course. I can just say that they have no excuse.
But could the reason be the source? And I'm sure there are many things you vehemently disagree with that the Trump administration is doing. So don't a lot of people think if he's doing it, it's on its face wrong?
That's a bad way to think. I mean, if you're just not spending any time on this issue and you have no authority and you're just mouthing off, I'm not going to believe it because it's coming from Trump, it's okay because you don't matter. But if you work on this one little bit, if you are having any influence about it, if you are speaking in public or even just to one friend, then you have the obligation to look beyond, quote unquote, the source and look at the material itself. Look at the HHS report, find something wrong with it if you're so suspicious of it. You should listen to, all the many voices. Like Kara Dansky is a lawyer who's been writing on this a lot longer than I have, who comes from the left. You should actually be reading the things that you're criticizing. Nobody has an excuse to be criticizing others without reading what they wrote and taking it seriously.
You said you hope to do gender full-time, but are you walking away from the AG's office? What are your next steps?
Well, as to filing a lawsuit, I'm exploring options. I received a lot of outreach after the article in the Free Press. And so I'm just at the start of looking at that. And I'm not able to make any, it's just too soon to say precisely what's ahead. But you know where I stand on this issue, and I hope that I can work on it full time.
Thank you so much for doing your story, this very powerful story. It takes a lot of guts to do what you've done. And a lot of gutsy people have made a difference on this issue. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Emily.